May I say one thing? Since
Yes,
you
sir.
got me on, I tweet at Judge Joe Brown TV, and the son of a bitches will not give me a blue check. They keep trying to hit me up. You got 1.25 million views, on this whatever. You got 980,000 on that. You should switch over to a professional status, and then they want money from you. But hell, I ain't giving the bastards a dime, you know. But that is me at Judge Joe Brown TV, even if I don't have a blue check.
Thank you, Judge Joe Brown. Everybody should be following Judge Joe Brown, please. Make sure you follow this gentleman. Make sure you follow Dr. Logic Supreme and Naeem that are on that are still up now. Make sure you follow. Make sure you check the Jumbotron for the links. And the United Sons and Daughters of Freedmen link is there too. Make sure you follow that. Okay. So, Sister Sean, you have 90 seconds, ma'am. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, peace, power, and prosperity. One thing I want to follow up, I do want to follow up on what you said, Judge O'Brown. Jury duty is a very, very important thing. If we want to produce justice, we got to show up for jury duty. And I'm just going to ask the Most High for the perfect words to say to you, Judge. But I live, breathe, sleep, and probably going to die for reparations. You can call it reparations, you can call it recovery, you can call it repair, you can call it whatever you want. But I consider myself a freed woman. Free woman. I am a woman. I'm a freedman. And what I'd like to specifically ask you is two questions. Is that what is the judicial question of the day? Is reparations, repair, and recovery. So I'd like to ask you, Ed Freedman, what we think is we need to understand what is our judicial path that we must take in order to be successful. A lot of us think that the Freedman path is the way to go because it is in legislation, it is in the books, it is in the law, and we think we should kind of build on that. Okay, so
Okay.
that's number one, and then number two, you said something about sovereign immunity, and I think that had some sort of relationship. I'm not all there about with the inability to sue, um, but I'd like your
Let me,
take
John. I
on.
think I know what I can get right there. Look, sovereign immunity is this: you cannot sue a governmental entity, either local, county, state, or federal, unless they give you permission to do so. They have to pass legislation that gives you standing to sue them, or it has to be in a category where some state or federal court, Supreme Court, has said there is an inferred standing to sue in certain things where the government has assumed certain liabilities and obligations that people ordinarily could expect or rely upon. All right. For instance, sanitation department decides because they hired some people who were slow mentally just to be nice, and they don't want to pick up the leaves that are stuffed in the grates in the drain sewer system at the curb in front of an elementary school. So they remove the gratings, leaving a 12-foot drop down. And the next day after they remove them, because they got lazy, some kids get off the school bus and 5 of them get broken legs. Well, you can't sue the city for that unless they've gotten written notice. On the other hand, if the street lights malfunction and people get hurt, then that is an implied right to sue. You see, these are things that are in that smoky area of confusion
The
when
smoky
it comes to
area, yeah, yeah,
confusion
and
for
that's why.
sovereign immunity. But you see, here's the point: it is a political question because right now, courts have never granted reparations to anybody, any of the groups that have gotten them. And it would have to be an Appropriations and Enablement Act by either a state legislative body or a federal legislative body, which is Congress, which has two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Now, see, you also have other people that might not like that, and even if they granted it, we aren't sure as to what the legal standing would be if they sued to block this. And then remember, you've got the composition of the courts to deal with. How is the court composed? Now, we are always better off when we have those who are strictly into following the Bill of Rights. When we had the civil rights era that got us legal civil rights backed up by the courts, which were expanded on by the U.S. Congress, the composition was interesting. We had Chief Justice Earl Warren, who had been Republican governor of California. We had Justice Hugo Black, who had been a former member of the Klan. We had William Douglas, etc., who dallied with the Klan, etc., 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 but they were all staunchly into following the Bill of Rights and the constitutional scheme. They weren't people that had demonstrated a friendliness for black people. They followed the law. Now, our problem right now is the Supreme Court is being stuffed with those who have become concerned about the abrogation of the Bill of Rights and those who want to abrogate it to push LGBTQ cult interest and rights. You see, so that is the dichotomy right there, and we're being used as kind of a smokescreen in between. And the Black Caucus and other Black legislative contingents and state level legislative bodies aren't really representing us. They're going with the money, and they're looking at for the most part, their part-time gigs is enabling them to enrich themselves because they respond to their core constituency, which is not the group that's getting them elected, but those they are acting as surrogates for. So we have to start calling people to account.
Yes. So if I could just add, so thank you for all of that. So back to the sovereign immunity, and then your explanation on that. And so what I'm confused about, we've got this sovereign immunity conundrum that we're in. So what I'm trying to figure out, so how was it that the ACLU can be pushed forward with proposing $450,000 per a person for immigrants who were unlawfully detained at the border or retained in some kind of disparaging way? How were they able to get through this? I'm thinking it's a sovereign immunity to put forth that lawsuit, and I'm tying it back to reparations and repair and recovery that we need for Black people.
I'm going to answer you. The people involved in the first instance can be identified by name, time, place, and circumstance. You go on a Black American who gets reparations, are you talking about prior to the 13th Amendment, or are you talking about Reconstruction, or are you talking about at any time? Let's take the case of Marcus Garvey and a lot of Caribbean immigrants who came to the United States. Their great grandchildren are American citizens born in the United States, but they came in after slavery was up in the U.S. So how do you establish this person here, a descendant of, let's say, a Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean person?
Well, I actually was.
How do you put them in? And then you see, do we take DNA tests? You can identify somebody's ancestry, where they came, where their slave ancestors were living in the United States, and the migratory routes the family took leaving it. But how many of us would start hollering about this as a plot to try and get Black folk to submit to some kind of experiment like the Tuskegee experiments, which weren't experiments, by the way. They were the Tuskegee observation plan. Nobody got infected. They just didn't get treated. And this is some kind of plot to sterilize us. I mean, what would we do if we got the opportunity to get reparations if we were, say, required to take a DNA test to prove that we actually had slave ancestry, which is what we're talking about? Are we talking about reparations for our slave ancestors or reparations for ancestors who didn't arrive until slavery was over?
Yes, yes. So I understand that, but what is
Hold on,
confusing
Sister
me
Shaw.
is
Hold on a
how
second, Sister Shaw.
ACLU,
I'm
Hold on a
saying
second.
ACLU's case is because the plaintiffs are identified. In other words, it happened to somebody who's alive and well right now, or to somebody is getting it through a parent who was known and was alive and well just a little while ago.
yes,
See, the
Judge.
statute of
Hold on.
limitations hasn't run on that. And somebody is granting that, and the ACLU is trying to go in under some other things that don't directly apply to reparations. Now, I mean, I could take all night long getting into the complicated background as to what they're doing. I understand it; it just doesn't apply to us.
Hold on a second. Right now, thank you, Judge Joe Brown. I'm gonna keep it moving to Coops. Coops T, if you could come in and pose your question.
Yes, peace and black power to the space hosts and speakers, and peace and reparations to the family. Um, Judge Joe Brown, thank you for being here. My question is on particular political strategy, and I'm so happy to hear you'll be running for mayor of Memphis. And we have a number of reparationists running for Congress this year in November. But specifically, my concern is the 6th District of South Carolina, where Jim Crow James Clyburn has been in office far, far, far too long. We now have a groundswell of support from the Black grassroots from all over the country, including myself in Hawaii, who are working to get Marcel Dixon to unseat Clyburn, which is going to be a formidable task. But with your respected and impressive political knowledge, can you possibly speak on how we, the Black grassroots, can get Clyburn out and get Marcel in there, because he is a reparationist and he is a Black first candidate?
Okay, make sure your candidate has a track record that is known and admired. All right. You may or may not have it with this individual.
Right.
Do some grassroots work, and what you can do is, this is a war. Mao said in his red book, incorrectness should be attacked and exposed and corrected at every available opportunity. I know we have this thing out there about we shouldn't criticize each other in public, but unfortunately, that's not sound advisement. We need to. You need to castigate Clyburn because he is a surrogate for LGBTQ. Now, I have what I call, and it's kind of crude, I call it the 6B explanation for a lot of what's going on. First B, they unbelt. Next B, they drop britches. Next B, they drop boxers. Next B, they bend. Next B, they spread butt cheeks. Next B, they get boy banged. And they tried it and they're compromised because the LGBTQ, the Q part stands for questioning and queer. They were questioning and now they're compromised and they don't want to be outed from their closet. Or else the other B for the ladies is unbra, drop bloomers, butt on bench, uh, knees bucked, and lips bust on beaver. And too much of that is going on in the Black caucus and in the politics where people tend to, we got a right to do what we want to do sexually. Fine. Yeah, that's your business, but don't put yourself in a position where you compromise your constituents because you don't want to be told on. And when you get elected by a Black constituency, for God's sake, do what they need, not go out and go advance what LGBTQ needs and deal with what I call poverty frou-frou, which is not doing anything for the Black middle class, the Black small businessman, or anybody's middle class. It's just you deal with the vested interest of high finance, big oil, LGBTQ, and you get paid off. You become wealthy on a civil servant's paycheck, and you don't deliver what you got elected to deliver, because we get responsive to take your booties to the poll rather than issues.
Got you.
That's it. And by the way, since you're talking about this, Cobb County, Georgia, which extends into Atlanta, people pay attention to the poison that's going on down there. They've got some racist, money making, money grubbing folk who get appointments as guardian ad litem, custody evaluators, who are friends with the wives of the judges, and you're not getting justice, and every one of them needs to be turned out in this election, and you need some replacements. You have some poison down there in Cobb County, Georgia.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Judge Joe. Tara, I'm gonna come to you in just a second, okay? Because I know you just got up here. I wanted to ask Judge Joe Brown, since he is running for mayor of Memphis. Now, Judge Joe, you're in a district that has 64.1% Black. Can you tell us, Black or African American? Can you tell us your platform, sir, when you're running for mayor coming up next year?
Oh boy, let's put it this way. One, we need to bring in some hydroelectric turbines and sink them into the Mississippi River so we can get essentially free green energy to run commerce. We need to deal with bringing barge traffic in directly from Europe. They load up barges in Europe, they put them on ocean going barge transports, come to the port of New Orleans, drop the hatch, get tows up to Memphis, where they go through customs, and Europe is trying to get into Memphis as a main entry seaport. These clowns around here want to keep it a small town, so the people that are into the big five, real estate acquisition, management, development, they bribe the city councilmen and county commissioners to get zoning variances, and then they get contracts with the city and county at taxpayers' expense to build structures and set things up that they get to run, and they're supposed to give the city or county 4 to 6% of their net profits, which their accountants zero out to nothing. So we essentially pay for this same group to make money, dollar over dollar at taxpayers' expense. We need to do something about exercising civilian control of the police departments. We need to use the director of police position, which is something that sits exclusively at the pleasure of the mayor, like the Defense Department has a Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Army, Navy, Air Force, etc., civilians. So we have a sub-director of homicide, uniform patrol, property crimes, sex crimes, etc. So we don't have ineffective police review boards. We've got civilian control and management of the police department. We use the police to give them a constructive function to identify those youth who would be leaders, or they might be gangsters, and give them an opportunity to develop leadership, have them liaison between police department and the thug. We need a district attorney, which is coming up, and I'm supporting, if anybody's in this area, a sister named Linda Harris for DA, and she's amenable to having the police interface with the youth, so those who are savable are identified. So instead of putting them through our poisonous juvenile court down here, which is an exclusive and thoroughly profit-making entity that doesn't give a damn about the welfare of the children, just corporate profitability, and we hold off affirmative charges on juveniles so that they are come through a mandatory counseling setup that I'm going to assist in forming. And when they complete that, charges just aren't proffered. So that would keep them out of that nasty system. We need to deal with setting up police communications that emanate from the citizens. We need some arbitration proceedings that are sponsored by the city, sort of like what I did on that show. But the reason for that is to reduce this interscene violence, because white folk have courts to reduce moments of violence because they resolve disputes. But the average person living down middle class, white, black, brown, red, yellow in this city can't afford to exercise the courts because they can't afford the lawyers and the court costs. So it would be a place where lawyers can't practice, and you've got arbitrators to resolve disputes that would cut down the violence. We need some rehabilitative training for vocational stuff. So when we get enterprise brought in here, which would be ideally situated where you used to have manufacturing centers, not located where you had the raw materials, but where you had the fuel supplies, they'll have that. So when people are debating on 72.18 per hour or 97.50 an hour instead of raising the minimum wage to $15 and everybody's got a stake on keeping their children and the children want to stay someplace, it can happen. We need to get rid of these corrupted voting machines we have here. And the Justice Department under Bush, Obama, and Trump found that these machines have been corrupted since 2000, and there hasn't been a fair, straight up election in 22 years. And in fact, the feds put up the money to replace every damn machine 14 years ago. But every time it comes up for a simple resolution, majority resolution, we've got at least 3 black Democrats on the county commission who vote against it. Now they were forced to buy the machines, they've warehoused them, and they don't want to use them, and they still want to use the machines that are corrupted. California used to use them, but they were so corrupt that California put a pamphlet out online saying, here's how you corrupt them. All you need is a smartphone like an iPhone or an Android. And you do this, 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 and this. You need the encryption code, which this is what it is. I published it. So it's out there, so you can't say this stuff is not being corrupted. You need the candidate numbers, the office numbers. You dictate a text or you type up a text to a third party, say a friend. You walk in at the beginning of early voting. You walk within 5 feet of these particular machines. You press the send button. The card reader picks that up. You own that machine. And in 10 minutes, you own the whole precinct. And in 45 minutes and an hour, you own the whole system for the duration of the 4-week-long, 6-week-long early voting period. And then you have another Confederate walks in on main voting day, and he does the same thing. And then you own that system. And when one candidate, say A, gets 100 votes, 17 get taken away and given to candidate B, who you're supporting. And then when you analyze the machines, say there are 2 candidates, one's Democrat and Republican, instead of getting the vote split between the 2, you'll find there are 3 or 4 extra candidate numbers that don't represent anybody that did 60, 100,000 votes. So, I mean, it's absolutely corrupt, but they won't replace these damn things because they're on the take. And too many of them get feedback. And the latest thing to watch out on the local basis is the Supreme Court, once again, a few years ago, ruled that the 15th Amendment protects all people, including fictional ones, aka corporations, so you can't discriminate against them when it comes to their involvement in politics. So that means they can contribute to candidates. So in some states, what happens is the corporate entities get the money allocated to them by the activities of the legislative bodies, and then these corporations donate back as corporate fictional people in fashions that allow these crooked politicians to get the money and put it in their pockets. Some states don't have any prohibition on it, and as long as you pay the taxes, it's yours and declare it. So we've got to clean up this corruption and start demanding of our representatives to show us what you've done. Memphis, you cited the statistics. They've got the 9th district, which is 92% black, elected its first black congressman in 1974. They've got a white Jewish guy who's gay, and his most famous piece of legislation is a binding resolution on the congressional cafeteria mandating paper straws. And that's all he's done except supported LGBTQ causes and those of the Big Five interest in Memphis, Shelby County. So black constituents haven't gotten a damn thing out of him. But you have all these pulpit pimps, these chicken eaters lined up to get money donated to them that you can put in their pockets. I mean, what are you going to do with $25? You sell your people out for $50, you low down scumbag, but that's happening. So they're preaching from their pulpits to go deal with this. We got a sister who is one of the people who revitalized the Afro-American Patrolmen's Association of 1979. She was a street cop. She went to law school while she was on patrol. She was known as a fair cop. She was a federal prosecutor for 15 years, went over to the civil side of the U.S. Attorney's Office for 4 years, and then became a criminal defense lawyer and is an arbitrator, and she's running for DA. And we already got black preachers running around trying to support the lesbian witch that's in there right now, who is a corrupt individual who in front of me back in the 1990s gave this offer on something she tried to sneak in my courtroom. It was 1 year upfront probation, unsupervised probation, with the record to be expunged at the end of the year, and dismissed the female co-defendant. They were white. They were in the country club set. They were friends of the family. And guess what they had? Almost 3,000 hits of crystal meth, about 1,500 of Quaaludes, 4 pounds of essentially pure coke, and 4 pounds of pure, 2.5 kilos of coke pure, and almost 4 kilos of heroin, for God's sake, pure. And that's 45 years minimum in the state sentencing scheme, and life in the penitentiary and the feds. And she's offering them 1 year up front unsupervised probation, no record. And Narcs had worked on the case for 3.5 years and busted the man with almost $750,000 in cash when they vamped on the scene. So she was letting them go for that. And that's what you got at DA. This particular DA is notorious for giving out the stiffest sentences for simple possession of marijuana in the United States, and 95% of the people that plead out are black. She has been found by Harvard and Yale and Stanford law reviews to be the most corrupt DA in the United States of America. And in the last 20 years, she personally has more findings against her as an individual of prosecutorial misconduct in the DA's offices in LA, New York, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Miami, and Detroit have collectively. And these fools are still trying to give her a black bloc vote. Yes, and you want to know something else that's tragic?
What's that?
Only 28.6% of the registered voters in Shelby County are white. And only 19.1% of the registered voters in Memphis are white. But they got a white mayor, a white clerk of court, a white this, a white that, you name it. And a gay black mayor for the county mayor. And they have, out of the 10 criminal court judges who have unlimited jurisdiction, 5 of them are young, racist, white former prosecutors.
Well, Judge Joe Brown, thank you for that rundown. I mean, we definitely, anything that we can do, we'll be definitely speaking more on this, but to be able to help you to
Well,
be
I'm
able
not
to get
talking about
control.
me. I'm
Oh,
not
I
talking about
understand.
me. But I'm
No,
saying
I totally get it.
this is the largest predominantly black jurisdiction in America. It's bigger than Atlanta. Most people don't know that. But the point is, if here, where we ought to have a black Mecca, we have that kind of nonsense, everybody within the sound of my voice needs to be on notice of what's happening where you are, and these sellout house Negroes who won't come off the plantation are corrupted and acting as surrogates for people who are our enemies. Now, that's the point. I'm just saying, where the black man has the best chance in America of making a Mecca for himself, it is that corrupted. We need to pay vigorous attention. I'll tell you another thing going on that we need to be aware of. There's a movement afoot to make Washington, D.C. a state. That is BS. If the people there need to vote, then all they have to do is modify the charter that they have, so just the mall, the government mall, remains a district. So you can operate the government, and everybody else goes back to Maryland, where they can register to vote and vote as Maryland citizens. So they have congressmen and senators. We don't need a small, medium-sized city having 2 senators and 2 congressmen to support LGBTQ cult to give extra ammunition to the destruction of the nuclear family we need so badly, manhood, womanhood, and childhood. Now, that said, a caveat I'll repeat so nobody can say I'm anti-gay. Gay folk, welcome to get your freak on in your bedroom. That's business. But LGBTQ is a cult. And just because you are a Christian, you didn't support Jim Jones, you don't support Branch Davidian and all of the pimp pulpit preachers, pulpit preacher pimps, pulpit pimps who want to pimp the congregation for money and screwing all the boys and girls, men and women, that they can get a hold of for money and promise them if they believe they'll get to heaven, they can be drug dealers, thieves, hoes, and whatever else. And that's another thing. We need some decency. We don't need to make the reprehensible our idols when it comes to listening to what's going on.
Absolutely, Judge Joe. Yes, sir. Absolutely. You know, I totally agree with what you're saying as far as, I mean, like, I didn't know that it's a city that has, like you're saying, it's a huge city and it's 64.1% black, you know, city, African American black. And it's only like 29.23% white. So you would think that it would have more representation in politics, and that and it just makes no sense how a city so you know, I mean, this is like DC back when Marion Barry was in office, right?
Who was
And
from Memphis, by the way.
right, he was. And he's an alpha also. So absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We're gonna go there because people always talk negative about the D9. We have some powerful D9 people right up on this stage, right, Judge Joe?
Yeah, there you go.
Yes, sir.
But see,
I am.
this is the
Yes, sir.
thing. 92% black in the 9th district, and they can't elect a black congressman.
Right. That doesn't make sense. You
Because,
like,
is it
yeah.
because we're that stupid, or we are that stupid to allow our black county commissioners for money to continue to mandate the use of corrupted voting machines? I'll give you another example of corruption, which is here, but it's typical. Okay, somebody on the black side on the county commission came up with the bright idea that since Tennessee had a law saying you cannot take Confederate statues out of public parks, they would sell the public parks where the offending statues are, so the private entity that bought them could sell the statues. Well, he and another young lady on there passed a private act allowing this private nonprofit corporation chartered to operate city parks, which they don't do. But the Black County Commissioner, who is a lawyer and ought to know better, he chartered this particular corporation. So without bid, they bought this one lot in what is in the hospital complex in Memphis for $2,500. They removed Nathan Bedford Forrest's statue. Good riddance, it seems. Okay, there is a prime piece of property on the bluff overlooking the Mississippi River where Jeff Davis had a statue. They sold that without bid for $2,500. Now developers are offering this private corporation up to 25 million total for the 2 properties that cost a collective 5,000. Now, to show you how bad it is, the female who black voted for this has a half brother who's getting paid $5,000 a month by the county to store these damn statues instead of donating them to a Confederate museum. So they stand to make a $25 million profit. Wow. And $5,000 a month for the last 3 years. And the taxpayers who badly need the money aren't getting one damn dime. That's just exemplary of the ripoff. Now, that is typified in what you find in a lot of other places. Not all of them, but too many of them. I would
Wow.
suggest that Chicago, Cook County, has a dire need for its citizens to look at what's going on up there.
Wow. We do have Cook County citizens that will be following. If they're not already on here, they're from there. And thank you for that pointer right there, Judge Joe Brown, for them. I'm not gonna keep y'all on here long. I'm gonna let Tara Perry come in and pose her question to Judge Joe Brown. Judge Joe Brown, we're looking at giving you your time, sir. And I mean, I figure 3 hours.
I'll
That's,
be
that's
brief.
a lot.
I tend to, as old man rambling, not
No,
rambling,
Judge
but
Joe, this is
I'm trying to get it
great
out.
game.
Go.
This is great game, sir. I'm sure Tara appreciates it. Tara, you can come on and pose your question to Honorable Judge Joe Brown.
Thank you, Roz. Thank you so much for hosting this space, Logic, Naheem. Thank you so much, Judge, for you spending time with us in these spaces. To have someone of your expertise and your caliber and your experience to dialogue with us is it's quite special. So I appreciate it so much.
My
I have
pleasure.
3 questions. I'll try to make it quick. So as a reparationist, there are many conversations that we're having about qualifications and criteria, basically trying to prevent white people from saying they should get reparations, right? So after we've had discussions about lineage and being able to trace a relative to the institution of slavery or as a slave to that status, does the Equal Protection Clause not allow for the racial criteria to be a requirement for reparations?
Well, generally, when Congress has passed a reparative bill, of which there have been several, probably the most obvious is the one for the Japanese Americans and their internment, also some for Native Americans, but that actually, we don't think of it anymore that way, but because of treaties, that's actually more a matter of what used to be considered foreign policy. The individuals and classes are clearly defined, and in each instance, other than stuff like, say, to the Japanese, there is a sovereign authority, the tribal nation, tribal council, that to an extent is responsible for the ultimate distribution of the grant. But it goes through, again, as an appropriations and enablement act. So you have to have a class identified. Now, one of the problems is that your identification of class, you there?
I'm
Okay,
here. I think you were going.
somebody's
Mhm.
music came in. What happens is that, see, identification of class becomes difficult for this reason. You remember this thing about Thomas Jefferson's descendants by Sally Hemings, the slave? They
Yes.
look like your next door white people, but when they got the DNA analysis, they did have a significant slave component or black component. The problem is that the average white person in America, particularly of English extraction, is about 1/4 African. They just don't look it because what comes up in their makeup is African, but it's not those African genetics that control appearance. So, you can see it in Puerto Rican families. And you used to be able to see it 60, 65, 55 years ago in black families in places in the South where you would have 8 or 9 brothers and sisters, 14 brothers and sisters, and they would range from looking like they got fresh off the boat from Africa to looking like they were white people and they had the same mom and dad. So one of our problems is identification of who's in the class. The other problem I alluded to was not only who's got the African ancestry for real, it's got to do with when did the African ancestry come in? Do you come in from recent African stocks who were not here when people were enslaved, but came in 20th century. Who gets it? Is the reparations for what happened during the period of absolute wrong slavery? Does that bleed over into coverage for somebody who is here or his origins date from Reconstruction or Jim Crow? Where do we make the line? Do we have somebody like President Barack Obama who wouldn't qualify because he's got no Black American ancestry? In fact, the weird thing about it is we have Black people who look like us who have more white ancestry than they do Black. For example, let's take Obama. His grandfather on the maternal side is first cousins to President George Herbert Walker Bush and second cousin to George W. Bush. So Obama is third cousin to President George Herbert Walker Bush and fourth cousin to George Walker Bush. Also, Dick Cheney is first cousins to George Herbert Walker Bush and third cousin to Barack Obama, fourth cousin to Barack Obama. And then you have Warren Buffett, the billionaire, who is second cousin to President George Herbert Walker Bush, and Brad Pitt, third cousin. So what are we dealing with? We got the one who looks Black, but he ain't part of the group. And we have folk that look white that are part of the group. And if you saw the brothers and sisters and got a DNA test, you said, this dude 49% Black. When you got a lot of Black folk that high pale. I'm high pale, but I'm 52% Nigerian. So, I mean, I just got some dynamics because most of the family members I have are either dark or brown. But I just came out high bright. That was the mix. But again, I had nappy hair when I had hair. So it is what it is.
So, Judge, can we have a racial classification requirement for reparations, or does that violate the Equal Protection Clause? Not if you have African ancestry, but have you in the previous 10 to 12 years, as Dr. Sandy Darity's criteria suggests, and from here to equality, can we require recipients to have identified as Black within the prior 10 years before implementation of the program?
I think a DNA test should be required. And I think the DNA test should reveal some actual slave ancestry. Now, DNA is accurate enough to tell where in Europe you have European origins, where in Africa you have African origins, what tribal groups are there now, what national groups are there now in Europe, when it occurred, how you got into the United States, where your initial slave ancestors came in, where they flowed, and how they got to the north, south, east, or west, wherever they find themselves now. And I did AncestryDNA.com quite a few years ago, and they started off with about 400 folk they had tested that were blood kin. Now it's up almost 4,000 people. So you find out some interesting stuff. I think that should be a requirement, because if it is reparations, what's it reparations for? Because you just happen to look like us, but you came over here voluntarily, or you look like us and you got brought over here involuntarily. But like one gentleman we were discussing, I wouldn't call him a gentleman, but a hard-headed idiot, he claims we didn't even get brought over. We got transferred in spaceships by space aliens a 250,000 years ago. So, I mean, I suppose knowing him, since I don't know him, but he seems to be a hustler, he'd be standing in line with his hand out, but he denies having been brought over in a slave trade. He claims the Native American, the American Indians aren't the Aboriginals, it's Africans, and the Indians got picked up from India by the white folk who came over here at the beginning of the 19th century and enslaved the Black folk that were here. Now, they'd get cut out if that's your story, but Supposing it wasn't your story, you're just stupid enough to claim that myth. Would you be entitled to reparations if your DNA showed it? These are things that have to be determined because nobody's talked about it. And when Sherman came up with the 40 acres and the mule by his military district order, January 14th, 1865, it was clear. There you were in the South. You were a grown man and you were claiming you got a black family. Yeah, you were an ex-slave or you had to deal with this, so you were entitled to the reparations of 40 acres and one damn army mule, which you got. But now it's difficult. So one of the primary difficulties is what class gets reparations if Congress passes a Reparations Enablement and Appropriations Act? In other words, where is the money? Now, here's another thing, too. We owe $63 trillion to the Chinese. Our gross income for 2017, which is the last year I've got the specifics for, was $19.7 trillion. But if every black person got what I think is equitable reparations based on the number of us that seem to have slave ancestors, that would be $14 trillion, which would only leave about $5 trillion out of the $19.7 trillion net income or gross income for the country for 1 year. That's kind of steep, and I don't know if Congress would be willing to make that kind of appropriation. Now, there are all kinds of things that could be put in here besides money. Vocational training, educational training, reinstitution of affirmative action in an effective way. I suspect some of us, if we got a check, would induce me to go in taking out an interest in an athletic shoe store so I could get a lot of money from people going in and buying one of every color and every style of Nike for each of their children and boyfriends. But, you know, there are those considerations. Who's in the class? Now, I've spoken long enough on that.
Okay, thank you, Judge.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, since you've been around for a while, and as someone who's deeply engaged in politics and really passionate about Black people, like I'm finding high Black political apathy, right? And I want to know if you know where this has come from, how long,
Yes,
like,
I
and
saw
like
it
the
coming.
conspiracy theories, the
It's no
pretendians.
conspiracy. It's
Did
no
did
conspiracy
your
theory.
did your generation go through these tug of
No,
war?
we didn't. No,
Okay.
we didn't. None of them before us did. What's
Mhm.
happened is a certain group got control of Hollywood, and it was their conscious objective to destroy manhood because they thought it was a positive evil. So they set about doing it, and Black folk were viewed as the most dangerous for being the most masculine. So their objective was to destroy masculinity. So for 55 years, they've been on a concerted program to glorify dysfunction by glorifying pimps, hoes, drug dealers, thieves, gangsters, burglars, robbers, and all sorts of folk who don't do what men ought to do. And they have glorified the downside, the harlot in the women, single parenting, and somehow or another made somebody that was trying to better themselves look like they were some kind of white sellout. So that has been a bad thing. We have had elected officials who started off being elected and to an extent appearing to deliver to their Black constituents, but who now we find are nothing but surrogates for LGBTQ, the cult, and for others who don't have our interest at heart. So we have to turn that around. This is new. I have never seen such a deplorable lack of appreciation for education. Going back to the Civil War, General Grant, at the end of the Civil War, as the Union commander, conducted a survey in the Union Army, and he said initially he was astonished to discover that the colored volunteers, meaning the Black soldiers who constituted 1/3 of the Union Army at the Civil War, were the only group of soldiers where every single person in a unit was literate. There were no white units where every single somebody in them was literate. The only ones were colored. So what happened to our thirst for education? He said you never saw a colored soldier without a book to read or something to write on, writing letters and practicing writing or practicing his arithmetic. So what happened to us? That's new. Back in the 60s, if you were a together black man, you were a college student, or you had the right kind of job because you didn't want a paid vacation to the Nam for a year and get intimately acquainted with AK-47 bullets and slimy things that crawl through the trees, over the bark and leaves and in the slime, and you're walking up to your knees in human excrement in these rice paddies. So it switched from the young black man who was doing something to the pimp, the drug dealer, the murderer, the gangster, the thief, the burglar, and the idiot who's living off of his women instead of supporting his women. Yeah, that's when it started. They used to go around college campuses. I was graduated in 1969. I was that member of the class of 69 from college, UCLA. And they went around campus and all over the school trying to talk about war is a man thing. We must change the way boys are raised to men. We must teach them to emote, to cry, to shout, to let it all hang out. We're unisex child occurring. Have boys and girls with the same hairstyle. Little white boys wearing long curly hair like their girls. Black boys wearing braids like their girls. See, my African friends and roommates in the 60s used to say, Joseph, what is with this thing here? Black man don't wear no braids. That is for the girls. You can wear dreads, but not the braids. What is going on here? And see, we did that on our side too. And we had Superfly or the Black Caesar, where the hero of the movie was a drug dealing professional hitman, where he rides off into the sunset smoking a big cigar after a shootout in a Long Beach warehouse, after a bunch of dead black folk are laying out on the floor that his boys have killed to corner the drug trade in that part of LA. Or Superfly glorifying the sale of cocaine. It came out in 1971. I was in D.C. in 72 at this think tank. And I remember a roommate of mine from LA, we were driving around looking, and there was line coming out of the theater where they bought the tickets to the end of the block, down the long side of the block to the end of it, down the short side, and back down the long side, down the short side to the middle to get in line, to get in there to see Superfly. See, that's where it went from, where we were power to the people, black power, you know, doing what we had to do, where we were getting black businesses, black community organizations, to something else that happened, a safety net where everybody felt entitled and nobody was trying to get ahead. A whole bunch of folk were having outside babies just so they could get a bigger check. And then they were calling them little ends and dogs and black ass, this, that, and the other. And then in 10 more years, they weren't 14 and 15, they were 24, and that's the 1980s. And in the 1990s, they were in their 20s, and then in the first decade of this century, they were in their 30s and then 40s, and now in their 50s, and they got great, great, great grandchildren. I had one little jackass 29 in my courtroom in the 90s, and he had 64 outside children and wasn't paying a dime in child support. Yeah, we spread this because we bought into it, and we have glorified the lowest common denominator. We've got to say it's all right to be able to speak English. It's all right to have a job. It's all right to support and help out your wife or your significant other. It's all right to raise your children. It's all right to say, you ain't going to be a thug. You're going to be somebody that's got mannerability and home training. It's all right, sisters, to get charm school so you don't run around acting a worse heathen than the boys. What's going on? See, we have to make these adjustments. Yes, it was a plan, but we ought to look at it so we can use it for our own purposes, and we ought to be formulating some alliances right now when that Hispanic box, are you Hispanic, non-Hispanic, and then what is your race? See, that ethnic group is being made large, and we're going to be left behind because we will not be the largest ethnic minority. We aren't now anymore. White folk will be a larger ethnic minority than us, then the Hispanics, and then we will have racial ethnicities that are split up or grouped in the Hispanic category. See, so we've got to do some adjustments, so we've got to wise up, and it takes a lot of hard work. You don't get this just for watching something that's a 15-second sound bite, or you reading something on Twitter. You got to work at this. So let's suck it up, sit down, and work, and make up for the time we didn't spend at the kitchen table doing our homework, K through 12, and do it now. I pass.
Thank you, Judge Joe Brown. For I want to. It's the time now. It's 10:17. We got people that are coming in and that have some questions. However, I hate to have to do this, but I'm starving, y'all. We've been here since 7 o'clock, and I really want to be able to give Judge Joe Brown his flowers and appreciation for being able to spend these 3 hours and 17 minutes with us. And maybe, Judge Joe, we could do this again sometime if you enjoyed yourself here, because we
Well,
certainly enjoyed you. Yes,
it's
sir.
it's my obligation. I've seen this, done this, experienced this, gotten bored with this, but I need to pass it on. And by the way, if you notice what I write on Twitter, I sometimes retweet other stuff just to give you an opportunity to see the other side. By the way, I will retweet you if you write it out in the context where we understand what you're talking about when you are giving a reply that I'm going to retweet. In other words, yeah, it's wrong because put in there what you think is wrong. In other words, state the subject. What are you replying to? And if you contribute to the discussion, I'll pass you on. Don't mind. And by the way, there's shadow blocking. I paid a young man who is into accounting a considerable amount of money. And you know how on Twitter, if you go, you can find out the names of everybody that's following you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he audited it. He said, Judge, I stopped at $250,000. He said, but they're only giving you 52,000. I said, yeah, I
Wow.
know. They shadow block. I've had 5,680 folk follow me in the last 2 weeks, and they ramped me up from 52,777 to 52,887 as of noon today. And there were 44 people dropped. So what happened to the other several thousand? See, they shadow block you.
Right.
They don't want, see, a lot of you get shadow blocked. A lot of you have some good stuff to say because some of your observations are profound and your individual ways of putting stuff are very interesting. And I have to say, wait a minute, let me go read that again. That's very interesting the way they put that. They could do a little proofreading, but the message is there. Okay, I'm going to retweet this. And then there are ways you can beat Twitter at its own game, too. Learn them. And somebody, by the way, needs to set them up so they get snatched into court. This is something we can do. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube get declared to be public utilities. People always say, well, they're private, they can do what they want. No, you can't. When you monopolize the airways and you have electronic communications that are enabled by the citizens of this country, then you can't block the exercise of free speech. Just like in the 19th century, you had these utility companies that said, Well, our guys want to develop this, so we're not going to supply gas or then electricity to these areas so we can run them out and we get the properties cheap. Well, it got declared, and this can go through courts. They are public utilities. They can't do that. They have to serve everybody equally, and they can't suppress free speech that's legal under the Constitution because they say it's disinformation or it hurts somebody's feelings. That's not why we have the First Amendment, to protect feelings or to edit what is disinformation and what's factual. That's supposed to be left to the people to make that determination. So, yeah, let's have at it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Absolutely, Judge Joe Brown. Well, I want to definitely, just like I said, for on behalf of everybody that was able to attend, people that were able to pose questions or couldn't pose questions this time. Maybe we can do this again if people want to do it again. If you want to do it again, Judge Joe Brown, we could set some other time up in the future and do this again. But we definitely want to, keep abreast of your campaign as mayor for Memphis, Tennessee, and whatever we can do. Everybody, basically, make sure you follow Judge Joe Brown. Make sure you send Twitter a note to letting them know that he needs his blue check. I don't understand why they haven't given him a blue check yet. And Judge Joe Brown says more profound information than 90% of what I'm hearing, 90% of the people I'm seeing, or I say what 97% of the people at least I'm seeing on Twitter with a blue check. I see them on talking foolishness, and I see him on and he's talking fact and deep, historic. You need to take notes. Make sure you go back and check everything that he was saying in this particular Twitter space, because I mean, you got to know this information for yourself. But what he was spitting was facts, and it's really deep. So do that, and we have the links at the top of the jumbotron. I just wanted to thank Judge Joe Brown again, thanking my co-host Logic and Naeem for being on here and co-hosting, and thank everybody that was able to ask a question, and thanking those that may have wanted to ask. And we'll see you in the near future. But we're closing the space out, and talk to you all soon.
How about got to go? This has been Judge Joe, but he's got to go.
Absolutely.
And go to jjbbbq.com and get you the best barbecue sauce and seasoning you have ever had. I
Yes, sir.
guarantee you, you'll love it. It's good on everything. I'm
Yep.
out of
Judge,
here. Yes,
Judge Joe
ma'am.
Brown, yeah, we need that hot sauce done too. That you need to do that hot sauce.
Yeah, we'll be out there. And by the way, we may
Absolutely.
be taking investors in the whole thing. If anybody's interested in getting to be part of that, we are about to hit the shelves all across the country at major retail outlets. It's qualified for health food. They can sell it in all those places, and we're going to make it halal so Orthodox Muslims and Jews can eat it, because we'll get it certified there too. So, yeah, it's good stuff.
Outstanding. And it's always a historic moment when By the People and Be the Power get together. I love partnering up with you, Roz. Thanks for inviting Be the Power out to co-host this space with you. And can't wait to do it again. Thank you.
All right, I'm out of here.
Peace,
Yes,
family.
sir.
Peace.
All right.
Peace.
Peace, family.
Power to the people.
All power to
Yes,
the people.
sir. Yes, sir.
All right, I'm out of here.
Yes, sir. Good night, Judge.